Record. All right, we're recording. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining Daniel and I today. I'm going to run through a presentation about a new technology, a new product we're very excited to introduce here at the end of the year. Before we get into that, go ahead and introduce myself and my colleague. Daniel, if you want to start.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So Daniel Rosales, Senior Director of Marketing, Product Management, and Technical Services. I've been with the company for, 17 plus years now. Yeah, so I know a little bit about the technical side, you could say, a little bit about the product side. Any other questions, Brooks is the man for you. But we'll be very glad to show you what we have coming up and give you a little bit of insight as to the future for the Telguard products and services.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Hey, everybody. My name is Brooks Anderson, newer Northeast sales representative at Telguard. I've been here for just over 2 months now, so a little bit less time than Daniel. Currently I cover Virginia all the way up to Maine. So anywhere within that area on the East Coast, I'm your guy. Thank you for joining us today. We put this together with a, new release and multicellular technology coming out. I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now. Holidays are coming up. First day of ISC East is today as well. So thank you for prioritizing this in your day to day. So we'll kind of get right into it. I have set it up too, so we'll take questions at the end. We'll have 10, 15 minutes or so to go through Q&A. If you do have anything that comes to mind, there is a little discussion/question tab on the right side of your screen. Feel free to throw a question in there as a placeholder, and we can come back to it at the end. So going through today, obviously with the holiday coming up, a cornucopia of communication. The theme is going to be maximizing multi-carrier technology. You guys know us as the alarm communicator experts, both in fire and burg/intrusion. So the outline for today, pretty straightforward. It's going to be a little bit about who Telguard is, our past, where we've kind of come from since the 1980s to present day. The problem with POTS, I'm sure most of you folks know on the call that POTS is becoming extremely outdated. Obviously there's better things out there, and as the clock continues to move forward, we are trying to move into new lanes such as cellular. I was going to go a little bit into code compliance as well, always important, especially in our industry. We're going to talk a little bit about, cellular and 5G LTE-M. So we will get to that here in a little bit. The actual Telguard system, how it works and how we play a part in the overall landscape of your systems. And then we're going to get into the main theme, multi-carrier technology from Telguard. I know a lot of you guys have seen a little bit about the new TG7FM radio that we have coming out, so we'll get into that here in a little bit. So thank you for joining today. So going into, who is Telguard? Tellular is our overarching name. We're a business unit of Tellular. We were founded in 1986, so we've been around the block for quite a while now. We created our first Telguard analog communicator back in 1999. We then moved into the cellular lane in 2005 and released our first 2G cellular unit. So we're still heavily in that landscape. As you guys know, we are a cellular first company. In 2010, the TG7FS, which is actually still around today, that was the first universal soul path in the entire industry, and that is, our flagship fire communicator right there. In 2012 and then 2016, we moved from 2G into the 3G and then 4G LTE landscape. And then in 2021, Daniel will touch on this a little bit later, as I had noted, we moved into the 5G LTE-M landscape, which is what pretty much everybody is using today. Our main theme as well, that's why it's highlighted, the TG7FM, the first multi-carrier communicator in the entire industry. You guys will hear more about it today, but we're very excited for the release coming up in a couple of weeks here. So pots, I know all of you guys on this call have a big background with using pots. um, you know, Running into it, plain old telephone service. It's been around for many years. The technology today is not much different. Your twisted pair, tip and ring, the concept stays the same. The tech is just not what it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. Copper wires are slowly fading. A lot of people are moving to alternative options to save money and transparently to save themselves from a headache. As we continue to move forward, there's a lot of ever changing issues, ever growing issues, I should say. The pandemic really evolved this process. Switches are no longer being manufactured. There was a big shortage of parts across the board as well. Telguard, we were luckily not as heavily impacted as other companies out there. We were, kind of prepared for this to happen, especially with our kind of cellular first mentality. A lot of supply chain issues as well caused a pivot away from pots, and we still continue to see a lot of supply chain issues today, unfortunately. Companies are moving to the next new thing, and POTS lines will eventually be replaced as they've already become outdated. And we know that POTS is always more expensive than the alternative. Kind of how I like to look at it is, think about CDs moving to streaming music. Once streaming came out, nobody in cars has CD players anymore. You're not really seeing people go and buy CDs in the stores. It's a lot easier to, pay a monthly fee for streaming, and it's a lot more easily accessible. You get more out of it too. Daniel, I'll go ahead and pass you the torch.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Brooks. So the POTS has been around for a while. Even in code, when you look at the NFPA code, the different versions back from 97 and 2010, before 2010, two phone lines, two telephone lines, two land lines, two copper wire setups, whatever you want to call it. It was more or less the standard for us in the fire world. Brooks, if you want to go to the next slide. Come 2010, there was a change. There was basically a change that was a long time coming in which the folks behind NFPA standards recognize that there is a need for better technology, newer technology. There is a need to recognize emergent technologies as capable of delivering those alarm events that, again, up to that point, were only being delivered by two-way radios, one-way radios, or phone connections. So with 2010 edition of code, that basically recognized that a new technology could be a single path, a single technology to replace the need for two phone lines, provided that it met specific requirements. So this is where the category for cellular came into the picture within NFPA code. And it's not a cellular category per se. It's actually a performance-based category, basically saying, regardless of the technology, whatever technology you want to use as a manufacturer, as a vendor, as a fire integrator, as long as it meets specific requirements, A through Z, it can be used. It is approved. So when it comes to SoulPath, the big things were number one, it needs to comply with the same power management requirements that a standard fire panel would. So you're talking about your 24 hours standby, your 5 minute of max peak consumption. All of that needs to be backed up. The one thing that was really a big change was the fact that if you're going to have a single path, it needs to be highly supervised. Now in 2010, they came out with the 5 minute supervision requirement. It took about 3 years, one full cycle, which actually, if you pay attention to an FPA code, that's a very quick turnaround. Usually it takes several cycles for something to change that much. But it was actually changed from 5 minutes to 60 minutes. It was an adoption that was basically taking place because there were a lot of companies that were taken to the TG7FS product and to our peers that came in afterwards and wanted to use cellular technology, wanted to use those technologies that have been approved as long as they have this high level of supervision, but 5 minutes was proven to be just a little bit too strict. Think of the landscape in 2009 through 2013. There was a lot of conversions, a lot of changes going on because we were getting ready for the 3G sunset. So carriers needed to make those transitions. They needed to make those hardware changes. Needed to take cell towers down for brief periods of time and then bringing it back up with the new equipment, and things of that nature would happen all the time. So with 5 minutes supervision, it was just very evident that it was a little bit overzealous. It was too much. So in 2013, that was changed to 60 minutes. Now, the ability to use cellular as a secondary path was still there. So with our technology, with cellular radios, period, you can use them as a single path as long as you have that type of requirement met with a supervision, or you can use it as one of your two paths out of the premises as long as it meets other requirements. Now, in this case, it would be the daily supervision or the 6 hour supervision. Now, when we look at the way our tail guards are set up, we're still seeing an awful lot of units using 24-hour supervision because that's basically what most jurisdictions will look for when you have two paths. But 6 hour supervision is something that was called out in FPA code starting in 2013. So it is something that we're starting to see a little bit of a ramp up. But as of today, it has not overtaken that daily supervision rate. Brooks, next slide, please. So one of the things that we talk about a lot, and I'll put this on the sales team, really, we talk about money, right? How much more expensive it is to maintain phone lines, how much easier of a sell it is for you to come to a customer and say, hey, you're paying $100, $200 per line. Let me go ahead and give you this cellular option and cut that price down to half or even less. Like that's an easy sell. Um, but as far as what benefits we get as integrators from the service itself, we want to take a look at what that means to us. So that's when the difference between supervision versus redundancy come into the picture, right? When we think of redundancy, if I keep my same system using two phone lines, I am basically being redundant, right? I'm having two different paths. If one of them fails, the other one should pick it up and run with the signal and deliver it to central station. Yeah, that's great. That's a great approach. However, when you take a look at two phone lines or two of the same type of service, I don't know that anybody has really taken the time to trace anything beyond the demarcation point. So how do you know that these two lines at some point don't converge down at the next very next switch that they hit? How do we know that they don't share the same wiring at some point going down the line? So how redundant really are you if you can't really tell me for sure that these are two independent paths, right? So when it comes to redundancy versus supervision, what you're really looking at is the redundancy aspect. Relying on a second line giving you that service means that you can bring down your supervision level down to 24 hours or even 6 hours. You space out those timer tests, well enough. You're gonna get a timer test every 6 hours or every 12 hours. That's great. That's still a huge gap in which, again, something could go down. A truck could hit right outside the premises, and both of your phone lines are cut. But guess what? You're not gonna know until your next timer test gets missed. And again, that could be 12 hours, could be 6 hours, could be whatever time you space out, however you space out your timer tests. When it comes to cellular technology, because we have to adhere to regulations, we have to let you know within 60 minutes that something has gone wrong with one of those towers, that something is going wrong with that specific carrier, right? So just by that alone, you get a better sense of knowing when something has gone wrong and being able to act on it versus waiting for something to actually happen, for a timer test to actually get missed before you know that there's something wrong and that you should act on it. So that's one thing. When you take a look at the other side of the business, right? So we are in the business of providing a service to our consumers, to our customers being property managers, building owners, you name it. In the commercial fire space, there's quite a diversity of customers that we cater to. The one thing that we don't control, we may have the system, we may own the connections, we may own every single piece of hardware. The one thing we don't own if we have a phone line connection being the main path to the central station is that phone line. So at any given time, you could have had that customer for 5 years with zero hiccups with that phone line. All of a sudden, they get a phone call from Comcast or Charter or Cox or one of these internet service providers talking about, hey, yeah, your phone service has been $150, $200 per month. I can cut it down to $20 if I give you this digital bundle, this digital package. Well, before you know it, FACPs are starting to go on telco failures because the dial tone is not right. Or what's actually worse, they're not complaining about anything at all until something actually happens, until an alarm needs to go out. And it just so happens that the failure rate is so not adequate, but not super low to where some signals are getting through and some are not. And, knock on wood, the one signal that fails happens to be a fire signal in a time of need. And all of this happens behind closed doors without your knowledge most of the time because you don't own that phone line. It is not under your name to make decisions to deactivate or reactivate service with that phone line. That's the difference maker when it comes to cellular technology and devices like ours, where you are essentially the owner of that line. So once you replace a phone line, a phone system, or an internet system with a cellular device, it is up to you and the cellular carriers to basically keep that connection alive. Now, the cellular carriers will do their part. I'm pretty sure you're not going to go out and deactivate a cellular device without a proper technician on site and doing everything you need to replace it with something else. So, of course, you're not going to have a problem there. That is the one thing, control of that path that you gain by going with something like Telguard. Brooks, if we can move over to the next slide, please. Now, we talked about code, right? We talked about the advantages of redundancy versus supervision and what that actually means to us. One of the things that we want to keep in mind, right? There's a difference between what is required, what is allowed, and what is best, right? If you look at NFPA code, and fortunately or unfortunately, not sure which way I go with it. I sit in a lot of these task groups and some of these meetings for NFPA, and NFPA is basically telling you what you need to have. So, for example, if you want to have a cellular device as your communication pathway, right? Under performance-based technologies, it's going to tell you if you want to have this device, this is what you need to have enabled. These are the level of supervisions and features and services you got to have for it to work. Now, code doesn't tell you what you shouldn't have. So if you read through the code, it doesn't tell you per code, 26.4.1.1, you cannot have X technology. It will not say that. So it's not going to forbid you from using something. It's just going to tell you in order for you to have it, this is the minimum requirement that you should have. Now, both of these two things combined do not necessarily mean that it is the best possible option, right? And this is actually where the multi-carrier kind of comes into the picture, giving you sort of a little bit more than what you need, not because it's required by code, but because we can actually do it. So what is best really has nothing to do with code. It has to do with our ability to provide or to steer you in the right direction. A basic, simple example, just with the Telguard units that you install today, right? If you ever install the Telguard, you'll read the manual, you talk to tech support, and we'll tell you, right, during installation, we want to make sure you have at least 2.5 bars of signal strength. Sometimes we'll be okay, we'll work with 2 bars. The reality of it all is that if you are in an area where you have good coverage, that unit will work with a 1 bar, even half a bar of signal strength. It will send signals and it'll work. The reason why we as a manufacturers recommend, even though it's not required by code doesn't tell us you got to have a specific signal strength, but we recommend a specific signal strength, is because we know that during installation time, it's 1 hour, 30 minutes, however long it takes you to install that unit. It's 1 hour out of your day, one day out of your whole year that you're in that location and you're measuring the signal strength right there. It could be that that happened to be the best possible scenario for that unit to have signal strength. If you are running with a very low signal strength during installation, and the next day you have a snowstorm, you have a thunderstorm, the clouds come in and start, messing with the propagation of signal, your 1 bar of signal strength could drop to no bars. So you could be looking at a situation in which you get no signal strength. However, if during the installation you did have those 2.5 bars and you face the same situation, you next day you have a snowstorm, think of the worst possible case scenario that would hinder your signal. Well, guess what? The drop from 2.5 to 1.5 of one, that 1 bar drop still gives you enough signal strength to continue to operate. So that is why when we look at things, we look at code to tell us what needs to happen at minimum. We don't look at code to tell us what not to get, but we also look at what the manufacturers bring to the table to tell us, what is the possible best solution for us. And that's where you may weigh your options between us and our peers and figure out, okay, so who gives me the best option? Brooks, next slide, please. So we have been doing, like Brooks mentioned, since the early 90s, messing around with analog technology, going into 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we're on the LTM technology, right? One of the things that we had to, by force, really, we had to more or less ride the coattails of consumer technology. All the way from analog to 2G and 3G and even LTE, we sort of just had to go along with it. What does that mean? That we were on the timelines of the consumer world. We were on the timelines of the iPhones, the Androids, and what their needs were. And what are their needs? Their needs are much different than ours. Their needs are higher bandwidth, more throughput. I want to download, I want to live stream 4K content. I want to be able to have these, webinar interactions flawlessly. I want to be able to stream Netflix as I'm driving from Atlanta down to Miami without any hiccups. Those are the requirements for these handheld devices. And let's be honest about it. AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, any carrier in the US, that is their bread and butter. That is where they make their most money, through data consumption. So the more data they can sell you, the better for them, which is why they usually give iPhones away. They give Androids away. Yeah, they'll try to sell it to you, when it first come out at a reasonable price, and then eventually they'll just say, by contract, sign up with a contract, and we'll go ahead and give you the phone for free. Right? It's not out of the kindness of their hearts. It's because they know if they put the brand new phone in your hands with a better capabilities, with more video, with higher quality pictures that you can take, you're going to be sending those pictures out to somebody, and you're going to be needing and using more data. You're going to be wanting to have better coverage, right? So that is the name of the game when it comes to cellular carriers. They want to sell you more data. Up until the 4G era with LTE, they were really catering to consumer world. Next slide, please. Now, as we transition into LTE, right, um, there was a new wave of requirements that were coming in from the world at large, if you will. Parking meters, traffic lights, anything that you can think of, your cars, right? Um, they were basically wanting to be connected. They wanted to be part of this IoT world, this Internet of Things. Internet of Things is basically a world in which we connect devices that don't normally get connected to the internet. I give an example of a light bulb, right? 30, 40 years ago, a light bulb was a light bulb. You get it a specific wattage, and that's what you get. Today, you go to Home Depot, you go to Ace, you go to Lowe's, you get a Samsung LED that changes colors because you connect it to the Wi-Fi. You have it on schedule. Um, Shoot, I have one for Halloween actually that actually vibes to the music. So it's really like what it actually has come into, what it does now, because it can be connected to a Wi-Fi, to the internet. It's just incredible to think about, right? So that world of internet connectivity making devices better has also translated to devices that are not near an internet connection. Cars, again, traffic lights, parking meters are big examples. Now, when you think about what they actually do, though, right? Let's take a look at a parking meter. What does a parking meter really need to do? It does a lot of the things on its own. It needs to connect for transactions if it takes credit cards, very minimal connections. Most of the parking meters are part of connected cities, right? That will basically just transmit status messages back and forth, a few times a day. And that's basically all they do. And this is where we recognize that these devices, IoT devices, machine to machine devices, had very different requirements. You're not going to see a parking meter getting picked up and traveling from Atlanta to Florida while needing to work all the way through. So the handoff part of it doesn't really come into the picture as much. If you have an issue with your phone, for example, right? If you have an issue where you're not getting good signal, what do? You walk outside. You go somewhere else to get a better connection. You connect to the internet, right? And you try to have, check your emails then. So there are a lot of things that we can do with our handhelds that these stationary devices don't get to do, don't have the freedom of doing. Next slide, please. And this is where LTE-M comes into the picture. So LTE-M is a 5G technology that essentially states, I'm catering to these machine to machine devices. They are not supposed to be used by humans. They are supposed to be autonomous and just kind of working on their own. What are their requirements? Well, their requirements are going to be, hey, they're probably going to be running on a very low consumption, because think of a parking meter, right? Solar powered, maybe batteries that need to last several years. So we need the consumption to be minimal. Guess what? Again, think of a parking meter. Yes, it's going to be outside, but it's going to be housed inside of a structure that's probably going to hinder its signal strength. So let's make sure that when you use LTE-M technology, that it uses the lower frequencies of cellular coverage so that it can have better in-building penetration. It can penetrate through those construction materials better, right? Guess what? It needs to be reliable. It needs to just be there, because there isn't going to be anybody trying to walk away with a parking meter. You're not going to pick it up and take it somewhere else a couple of meters down the road just so you can go ahead and pay for it. So it needs to be reliable. It needs to have good coverage. And one of the most important things, it needs to be scalable. One of the bigger headaches for anybody that has dealt with cellular technology, one of any of our early adopters, right? You probably dealt with a sunset. If you were one of our really early adopters, you dealt with more than a couple of them, and it's painful. It is a painful situation. When you think of you and an Android or an iPhone, right? You change it every couple of years. It is not the big deal. You kind of expecting it. Heck, there's people that will actually, be online at whatever time iPhone decides to have their press release, and they talk about the latest iPhone, and they open the doors for you to start ordering it. That's how the consumer world works. In our world, we want something to just last, keep making us that revenue, keep the customer protected, and not have to worry about sending somebody out to make a change. It's a heck of a lot different than residential market, commercial space, in commercial fire space specifically. You make a change, you got to run a whole lot of testing through it. There's a whole lot that goes behind closed doors besides just making that simple change. You can't just ship something out to somebody and have them activate the new device, right? So it's a big deal. Well, with LTEM, one of the big things that we looked at and we said we have to get this, we have to get on this and adopt it, is the fact that it actually has a provision that says when LTE technology sunsets, LTEM should be able to use the 5G network to continue working, right? So it's a specific type of technology that, again, it's catering to these devices. The needs of a parking meter or of a traffic light to send data back and forth isn't going to change much 5 years or 10 years from now. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to require more data to be sent through. What they're going to require is for that device to continue working with no hiccups for as many years as possible so that we don't have to invest in replacing them. Same thing for our Telguard units, same thing for anything in the commercial fire side. We want to not disturb what's already a working system. This technology gives us that.
Great. Thanks for that, Daniel. And perfect transition into the Telguard system. Daniel's example of the Internet of Things, connecting things to the internet that normally won't connect, his light bulb example. Looking at Telguard, really what we're doing is we're taking systems not meant to use cellular technology We're bringing them into that fold and being able to deliver alarm signals using cellular or internet-based systems. So looking at the Telguard system itself, we've had that relationship with AT&T or Verizon in the past and up to present day. So just depending on what's best in your region, at your specific location, you've been able to choose those two. And moving into that multi-carrier technology, that's the main theme of this webinar today. We've added T-Mobile to the group as well. So you guys are able to have access to all three carriers, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon at the same time. So looking at how the system works, I'll just stay high level on this. Pretty straightforward. The dial capture connects Telguard to the panel itself. Then Telguard transmits that signal or the transmission over to the Telguard Communications Center. And then that TCC on the back end is going to deliver to the central station over IP, phone line. And lately we've been using XML posting, and that's able to bypass the receiver and can go directly into things like Mastermind or Stages. So for multi-carrier, the main reason we're here today, kind of the big name on the street right now, especially within our company. The big emphasis is really not having to worry about choosing just one carrier. As I said, you've got access to all three now, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. How we're setting this up is you're going to set this unit up in your given location. It's going to kick on and it's going to self-rank those three carriers from 1 to 3. Let's say for this example, your best is going to be T-Mobile. It's giving you consistent bars over in that area. If there's an outage, the bars drop down to below 2.5 or 2. It's going to automatically fill switch down to that next best carrier, and then down to the third best if there's an issue there. And if all three are out, then we've got a bigger issue at hand than that. Daniel, I'll go ahead and pass it to you and let you get a little bit more in depth about how that carrier process works.
Sure. So I think Brooks kind of laid it out pretty well, right? So we do have, if you want to move over to the next slide, so we do have a patent pending approach by which we essentially turn the radio onto all three carriers, and not just by analyzing signal strength or the usual suspects. We actually let it run for a reasonable amount of time to sort of sample what the performance would be under each carrier. Once we do that, like Brooks mentioned, we'll rank them, we'll figure out, okay, in this particular location where this unit is right now, this is who we should go with, and that will be the more or less the first carry that gets onto. Now, one of the things that we do is that we essentially let the device decide what is best at any given time. So, just to give you an example, you bring a multi-carrier into your test bench in your offices. You want to check it out, you want to try it out, you power it up, you let it go through the CSP, which is automatic when you power it up for the first time. It runs and boom, it locks in and it gives you a signal bar, three bars of signal strength. Um, Happens to be on T-Mobile for whatever reason. Now you take it down the street, could be a couple of blocks away to a real installation. You power it up again. It is not going to have any consideration at all for what happened earlier. It doesn't matter if where it was previously powered, it was T-Mobile. If in this new location, it happens to think that AT&T has a reasonably better signal strength, it'll go to AT&T. If it thinks that Verizon has better error rates or things of that nature, it'll lock onto Verizon as the top carrier in that area. So there is no real attachment, if you will, as long as you power it up in a location that you're going to be working on. If you can go to the next slide, please. Now, why is it a patent pending approach? Why did we wait so long to get something like this going? Well, first of all, anything that's sort of modern or new, it takes a while to get the right people on board. One of the things that we knew we wanted to do was we wanted to control things. And by we, I mean we wanted to give you control of things. And by you, I mean the device, right? So what that actually means is that we could have done this a long time ago, by using what we called a mobile network, a virtual network operator, right? When you think of mobile network operators, it's just a fancy term for carriers. That would be your AT&T, your Verizon, your T-Mobile, your US Cellular in the Midwest. It's just a fancy name for them. When you look at MVNO, you add the word virtual in there. It's just basically another fancy term for an aggregator, somebody that has a contract with AT&T, has a contract with Verizon or whoever they choose to, and they basically resell those services. So could we have come up with a multi-carrier type of solution earlier? Absolutely, we could have. But the caveat there would be that the only way to do it would have been by going through one of these virtual operators. And when we do that, we're basically saying, "Hey, virtual operator, I need you to use all these carriers," which I guess technically would make us multi-carrier, right? But the decision making would be up to the virtual operator. So if they contractually they have a better agreement with AT&T over Verizon, who's to say that they wouldn't put AT&T on the top of the list of who they roam into, who they use? The way that we do it is we have single connections to each carrier. We have a dedicated virtual private network with AT&T, same thing with Verizon, and we of course we had to come up and create one for T-Mobile. So we have direct relationships with each carrier. We don't deal with any middleman, we don't deal with any third parties, direct connections to each carrier. And the determination of which to use is not done, not even by us on the back end. It's done by the device. Again, when it powers up or when it sees the need to change, which kind of brings us over to the automatic failover portion. Brooks, thank you. The way that we work, what we wanted to do was to give our customers peace of mind, right? On both fronts. Number one, it's always been a headache to kind of figure out what carrier works best. Is it AT&T? Is it Verizon? And as people in the business, we kind of figure out ways of making it work, right? When we go and quote, we'll ask, what carrier do you have? Do you have any dead zones or little things here and there that help us determine. May sometimes we carry both units in the truck and kind of figure it out during installation time. All of that is just kind of workarounds that don't get rid of the headache. Don't get rid of the headache that if you install the wrong unit, you may have good signal strength, but is it the best signal strength? Right? You don't really know until you put them side by side. So with a multi-carrier approach, we're basically saying, hey, not only are we actually selecting the best carrier based on our, sampling approach, but we're also telling you that if anything were to happen where that carrier, number one carrier of choice, goes down, has an issue, I go back to the AT&T issue that we saw earlier this year. Something happens, the unit will automatically fail over to what it considers to be the second best carrier based on its sampling of that particular location. Now, like Brooks mentioned, right? It's yeah, chances of one carrier going down, it happens. It has happened this year. Chances of two carriers going down at the same time, I'm gonna put that in the once in a lifetime type of scenario. Chances of all three, I really hope we don't get into that because of all three carriers go down. Just think of the massive impact it'll have, not just our fire systems, just our lives altogether, right? So by giving you access to all three carriers and having the ability to just kind of fail over into the next one, we're kind of giving you that extra redundancy. Is it required by code? No. Is it the best possible approach? Yes, because we're basically covering all our fronts. On the one hand, during installation, if you don't have access to cellular with AT&T, T-Mobile, or Verizon, right away, you just have to say this is not a good candidate for cellular coverage. This is not a good candidate for a cellular device to be your reliable source of communication. It's just not going to be it, right? That's number one. And number two, the fact that you can get not only on the top two, but the top three networks speaks a lot. Now, we do get asked the question a lot, like, okay, T-Mobile, but they're a small player. Why would you even entertain T-Mobile? AT&T and T-Mobile's coverage overlap quite a bit. Why are you going that route? Brooks, next slide, please. The very basic answer, because three is always going to be better than two. Basic answer, right? Would you rather have $2 million or $3 million? I would choose three all day. It's kind of sort of the same concept, right? I want to have three. I want to have redundancy, but if you give me redundancy on top of redundancy, I'll take it. I'll take it all day. That's number one. Number two, T-Mobile has been making a lot of changes within their network, and it hasn't been anything that's been happening recently. It's over the course of a long period of time. They've been making acquisitions. Metro PCS, one of the big ones. Sprint, probably one of the biggest acquisition mergers, and most recently U.S. Cellular in the Midwest. So they're aggressively acquiring and merging technologies, and most importantly, frequencies. That is really what was, from a technical perspective, that is one of the most attractive things for me, right? I mentioned earlier that LTM technology has provisions so that it can work in a 5G world when LTE, goes away. One of the things that is currently preventing LTE from fully going away or being sunsetted by the networks is the fact that big players like AT&T and Verizon don't really have a very good coverage map for 5G standalone. So I'm sure all of us here have, our iPhones or Androids or even Pixels, right? With 5G access. I'm 100% sure that none of us, I'm sorry, that all of us have seen at one point or another the little LTE logo on our phones. Even though all of our phones are 5G capable, even though we will get on the 5G network when we're in the metro area, when we were close to towers, there is a very distinct difference in the coverage where as soon as you drive a little bit outside of range, your phone will work, but it'll work on LTE. Chances are you're not going to notice much of a difference because LTE still has that great coverage, good speeds, and everything else you need. So you're not really necessarily paying attention to it too much at this point, right? The problem is that AT&T and Verizon, the way they're integrated their frequencies, they're using the higher frequencies, which is basically giving them very fast speeds, very extremely great throughput, but it's at the cost of coverage. What T-Mobile did early on was, with the acquisition of Sprint, they're basically setting themselves up to what we call the mid-range frequencies. So not the low frequencies that give you like that amazing penetration, not the high frequencies that give you that amazing data throughput, but in the middle. They have a wide range of frequencies in the middle that Sprint used to use. They've acquired, they've incorporated it. And if you start looking at some of the marketing that T-Mobile has been making over the past couple of years, they're touting the best 5G coverage in the US. And based on what we've learned from their acquisitions, their model, they may not be the fastest, they may not be the one that gives you the most bandwidth, but they do have the most coverage, the most reliable coverage. Now, think of that and what we talked about earlier as far as our needs as an industry and the needs of devices like ours, that fits right in. So our purpose with going to T-Mobile as a third carrier wasn't just diversity. It wasn't just because a third redundancy, path is better than two. It's also the fact that T-Mobile has been making a lot of moves to get into a better place for their 5G coverage, and we are all here to take advantage of it as early as humanly possible.
Perfect. Thanks, Daniel. So going into what the device actually looks like, just want to show you guys kind of presentation wise. So let it pop up here. So it's going to be SoulPath, as we had mentioned in the presentation. It is plastic shell. So if you guys are familiar with the 7FP plastic shell, a little bit smaller than a shoebox, I would say. And then red, because it is fire forward, but it's also rated for intrusion as well. And this is going to power directly off the panel too. So just giving you guys an idea of, what the actual unit looks like and a little bit more hands-on. And then we can, looks like we have about 15 minutes left. We got through that pretty quickly. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the raise your hand option or put them in the Q&A on the right side of your screen, and we can get those answered for you. Give it another 30 seconds or so. If we don't have any questions, I can go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So the question for those of you who can't see, Ryan had asked, when do you plan on releasing this product? So Ryan, we are in the final phases of the UL process. We expect this to be released into this month, December, early December at the latest. You can currently pre-order this through your preferred distributor, and currently they will be able to help you out with pricing as well, but the full release comes out end of month, early December. Okay, great. Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions here today. I'm going to go ahead and put my information back up on the screen as well. Oh, looks like we got one more. Sorry about that. Do you have to pay for all three services? No, it's going to be inclusive in the monthly service fee. All three are going to be, bundled in that same one fee that you're paying, as if you were just paying for Verizon or AT&T right now for your unit. So we maintain that relationship with the cellular provider. Daniel, I don't know if you want to get a little more into that as well.
No, I mean basically what you said is right, right? So we want to make sure that it's as easy as simple as possible. So the same model that you're using today, but instead of having a single carrier, it's just going to be a multi-carrier for the price that you pay.
Great. Let's see. Daniel, looks like you can help Ryan with this one. Do you have to input the initial provider when doing the install?
No, and that's the beauty of it. So one of the things from a product marketing perspective, right? What we want to do is we want to remove the cellular concerns as much as possible from your, worry list. You have a lot more to worry about than cellular technology, what to choose, what to pick, and whatnot. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So it'll choose for you what is best on that location, and it'll fail over to the next carrier whenever it needs to. Let's just say if that second carrier that it chose, because it had to fail over once, if that one happens to be stable and it never has any issues, it will never change again. It is just meant to react when it needs to. No attachments, no feelings to any particular carrier. We want to make it so the device does what it needs to do. Get rid of your headaches.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. As I had mentioned, we currently have the TG7 FM available for pre-order just through your preferred distributor, whether that's ADI, Wesco, Freed Brothers, etc., up in the Northeast. My information is on the screen right here. I'm the new Northeast sales representative, as I said. So if you need anything at all, feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email. And we've also recorded this presentation too. I will send that out here in the next couple of days, and feel free to pass that along to your colleagues and internally. But thanks a lot, Daniel. Thanks for your help on this today, and hope you guys have a happy Thanksgiving. And also, just remember, in case you guys burn your turkey, Telguard will be here for you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, guys.